there are, roughly speaking, what tools do we have in the box? One way of looking at this is that we have the market, busily making routers and widgets and ice cream sundaes and peanut-flavoured donuts and stuff like that. Fabulous stuff. That's the market over there. And then we have the state, and then we have this whole third bit, which is very, very often neglected, particularly at senior policy level discussions, which is the group of NGOs, of thinkers, of writers, of troublemakers, of academics, of all kinds of disreputable riffraff. You can put, if you like, political parties and churches down there if you want to as well, which are the representations of people as they group together to express themselves and to attain and to express their free will in ways that the market and the state have failed to capture. And there are plenty. So we have those three kind of buckets. Now, the first thing that strikes me, and it's partly a personal thing, is the profound misunderstanding that exists between those three sectors. And Carlotta touched on this. And I have this perspective partly because, I've basically been working now in fact, I've been working for exactly 30 years, and I've worked exactly 10 years in the public sector, and I've worked exactly 10 years in the voluntary sector, and I've had exactly 10 years in the private sector. So, and I'm just constantly, and always have been, really just amazed at the ignorance and incomprehension in each of those sectors about the reason why the other two are there. And it is pervasive. I'm not just talking about the UK. This happens all over the world. The public sector is chock-a-block full of people who think that the private sector are a bunch of low-level second-hand car salesmen, pond life, who are just out to rip you off and basically give you as little as possible and take as much of your cash as quickly as possible from you. The people who go into the public sector largely do that because they don't like that stuff. And they don't like it at a kind of gut level and at aesthetic. It just doesn't seem appealing to them. And it struck me with, huge force. A couple of years ago, I went to the G8 meeting in Glen Eagles when Tony Blair said, we will do climate change and we will solve sub-Saharan African poverty. Like he didn't add anything else to the agenda. And I went to the sub-Saharan African poverty session, one of them, and there was a room with about 400 people in it. And they were all of three types. The third sector was there were lots of NGOs there. And there were lots of donor governments there, and donor government officials and donor government politicians, and there were lots of recipient government people there, and they were recipient government officials and recipient government ministers, and there were some NGOs from the recipient nations as well. And there was this vast body of people all saying, what are we going to do and to try and solve this problem of poverty in sub-Saharan Africa? And we've poured billions and billions. We've gone out and made everyone feel guilty and got their money off them, or we've poured billions and billions and billions of dollars and euros and pounds into this subcontinent with not the effect that we wanted, but in many cases, precisely the opposite of the effect we wanted. We created something like the misfortune of striking oil in your country in many of those places. And the most extraordinary thing was that there was nobody in that room there who understood that the private sector is what innovates, creates companies, creates little companies, creates tiny little Cisco with 2 people, as it was 21 years ago, which grow into bigger companies, which employ people, which compete with each other, which innovate further, which employ further people, and generate the wealth in our societies, which leads to us to be able to pay taxes to support these governments. None of those people were there. Not only were they not there, but all of the people in that room didn't have any understanding of or interest in that sector. Their whole lives have been spent in economics, in policy making, in power seeking, in development of very many excellent, good, well-motivated people, but they didn't have a clue where money came from. They didn't have a clue where wealth came from. Extraordinary. And When I arrived in the private sector, of course, I discovered that the inverse of that truth was also true, to a very large degree. Most people, particularly most successful people and most senior people in most companies, and anyone who's thrived, particularly as an entrepreneur, believes that government is some kind of bizarre, malign force that was invented in order to make their lives impossibly miserable. And they really do. They think that taxation past the kind of 1 or 2% level is evil, and that government intervention and regulation is the enemy of innovation. And they just don't understand why they're there. They don't have any clue about where their workers came from, for example. No idea at all. They have no conception of the fact that the healthcare system and the education system and the transport system and the defense system, which created and maintained the infrastructure and the environment and the people and the employees, the healthy, safe, mobile employees that have made them rich, are all there only because the government provided those things and provided those core infrastructures. I could go on about this for the rest of the... In fact, that's what I'll do. Forget about this mutual ignorance, if we are to meet Carlotta's challenge and the seriousness of the problem that we're facing, clearly has to be broken down and fast. Because the nature of intractable problems like climate change is partly that they are complex and that they involve infrastructure requirements and that they involve misallocations of information and information gaps and information asymmetries, where we invest here and the benefits pop up over there, or where we pay, where we ignore the ill effects of an activity that we're doing today, and the ill effects pop up 1 generation or 2 generations or 3 generations later. So we have these set of fantastically complex intergenerational and geographical and interinstitutional misallocations of cause and effect and of information and of understanding and of innovation. And if we don't get governments and businesses and the rest of the riffraff in the third sector together to do the bits and the pieces that they can do in some kind of coordination, then we're going to fail. We are undoubtedly going to fail. The definition of the line between the market bit of it and the government bit of it, as Carlotta said, is regulation. And that line, which we have to redefine right now, as in the next couple of years, is defined by the point at which the market fails. The reason the market is so wonderful at doing what it does well is because human beings, like to become human, to become fully human, have to express their free will. We tried doing this with state. We did a couple of experiments of saying, let's forget about the market and see if we can allocate all resources just with the state. And the outcome was that you could have any car that you want as long as it was a Trabant and you didn't mind waiting 7 years. It didn't work because humans like to have free choice. It was a failed human realization system. By the way, we've also tried, unfortunately, the opposite. We've tried, let's have lots of market and no state activity. And I know that there are phases here where more and less are needed, but at various times and in various places, we've said, let's see what happens when the state leaves the stage. And the result is catastrophe and death. I mean, it leads to mass theft. It leads to mass robbery. Look at what happened in the Soviet Union immediately after the collapse of any kind of effective government there, when we saw how the market behaves when not regulated by the state. And the answer is, about 25 people steal 90% of the property in the country. And it takes a hell of a long time to get it back off them again.